I live in a family of 15 people, and my parents are abusing. They abuse us, and my 2 little sisters right now are chained up.
And how many of your siblings are tied up?
2 of my sisters, 1 of my brothers.
How are they tied up, with rope or with what?
With chains. They're chained up to their bed. The reason I ran away from home was because the chains were making places and they will wake up at night and they will start crying, and they wanted me to call somebody and tell them.
That call was made in January 2018 from a young girl who was desperate to make contact with authorities. Alongside a sibling, she'd been subjected to the kind of living conditions no one should suffer. And wanted the nightmare to end. The nightmare was created by her evil parents, who the girl managed to escape from. The escape was made from her prison-like existence by climbing through a window, taking an old mobile phone with her. It meant leaving her siblings on a temporary basis while she went searching for help. Hi my friend, I'm Royston, and welcome back to Tea and Crime. Today's episode highlights just how evil people can be, even to their own family members. This is the story of the 13 Turpin children who endured years of unbelievable torture at the hand of a couple who are considered among the world's most evil parents. I think it's time again to get ready with a cup of tea before we deep dive into this.
We live in stilts, and sometimes I wake up and I can't breathe because how dirty the house is. And so I wanted to call y'all so y'all can help my sisters.
Okay, so you're just around the corner from your house, is that right?
Yeah, I think. I'm not sure. I've never been out. I don't go out much, so I don't know anything about the streets or anything.
It became pretty evident the youngster had limited knowledge about the outside world and was absolutely terrified of being caught by her parents. If they knew what she was doing, her understanding was they would literally kill her. The operator then asked very calmly more questions, specifically after hearing the girl describe her living conditions as being filthy.
When was the last time you had a bath?
I don't know, almost a year ago. But sometimes I feel so dirty. I wash my face and I wash my hair. I don't know much about my mother. She doesn't like us. She doesn't spend time with us ever.
Who takes care of you?
I take care of myself, and Mother does buy food for us, so she feeds us, but we never talk.
She was frightened and probably uncertain as to what was going to happen. Her main goal was to have everyone rescued, but first she had to convince the police to believe her. The operator inquired of the young lady how she managed to get hold of a mobile phone.
It was a phone that my brother had that he was going to throw away, and I had to have a way to contact somebody like you, so I got it so I could call 911.
It turned out this escape had been planned over a 2-year period, but the question is, was she and her siblings actually rescued, or did the nightmare continue? Before we come back to this, let's talk about the parents first to find out who they were. The father was 57-year-old David Turpin, who was apparently religious. His wife Louise was 50 at the time, who was also religious, manipulative and stubborn. Her childhood in West Virginia, where they both grew up, was filled with trauma, especially as her own mother Phyllis allowed her and her sisters to be violated by a wealthy man who in turn paid Phyllis for those vile services. Louise and her sisters would beg their mother to put a stop to this child abuse, but she didn't. Interestingly, like her own daughter who made that phone call, Louise was desperate to escape from her mother. At 15, she started dating David, who at that point was 22, technically a paedophile. His dream was to make it big as an engineer. He often told Louise that one day he'd be rich. He wanted them to be a couple, so much so that he once impersonated her father by wearing a fake moustache. His reason for doing that was to convince the Princeton, West Virginia school where she attended to let him sign her out. It was the same school where he previously studied. They then absconded to Texas, but their freedom was short-lived as they were returned to West Virginia by the police. However, her parents didn't file a criminal complaint, but instead her father actually gave consent for the couple to marry, thus allowing his daughter to live the life she wanted. They married early in 1985. Now that Louise was no longer constrained by her parents, she started to distance herself from them. The newlyweds immediately found immense pleasure enjoying their newfound freedom. The stories he often shared with Louise about becoming rich one day began to materialize when he landed a high-paying job with General Dynamics and later with Lockheed Martin, two of the world's largest defense companies. As a specialist engineer, he was on a six-figure salary. And then early in 1990, David was transferred to Fort Worth in Texas by General Dynamics, where they lived at this address on Roddy Drive, in a favourable neighbourhood. By now they had an 18-month-old daughter named Jennifer. This was the beginning of that nightmare one of their future daughters would contact the authorities about. David and Louise held strong religious beliefs that couples should procreate without restriction. At this point, David was earning very good money, and it wasn't long before Louise invited members of her family from West Virginia to visit them. Her family didn't need to worry about the plane fare, as Louise paid for everything. Her motivation appeared to be centred on showing them how wonderful her life turned out. In fact, the family visited annually at the Turpins' expense. It was like a rags to riches scenario. Then over the length of 27 years between 1988 until 2015, they became parents to 13 children, consisting of 10 daughters and 3 sons. They also entertained the idea that God had called on them to do this, while giving the impression they were the perfect family. Then during the mid-1990s, one of Louise's sisters, Elizabeth, spent the summer with them at their home in Texas and witnessed a series of shocking revelations. See, gambling was against their Christian principles, but Elizabeth watched both of them gamble. She also listened to them frequently argue over money, yet they were supposedly well off. Additionally, Elizabeth noticed how extremely controlling they were over the children, not allowing them to go to the bathroom, eat or drink without permission. And during her stay, she never saw them express affection toward the children. Now, although Elizabeth was alarmed by what she witnessed, it didn't warrant any further action, as far as she could tell. However, throughout the 90s, they ran into financial difficulties but never told anyone, as they were determined to be viewed as well off. In 1999, they left their home in Fort Worth, moving the family to an isolated property in Rio Vista, again in Texas. According to the year 2000 census, its population was just under 700 people. The Turpin children were controlled beyond belief while growing up, being punished for even speaking to others, meaning they couldn't have any friends like normal children. And their new home soon became filled with animal cages. Newspapers covered the floors, which were saturated in feces. They had a number of cats, dogs and goats. One thing that stuck out in this new home was the fact there was no sign of any food in the cupboards. And the few neighbours they had felt something strange was going on. One of the strange things concerned a trailer that suddenly appeared on the Turpin property. And mysteriously, the family moved into it. Maybe it wasn't so mysterious, especially as the house had become uninhabitable. It appears as though the Turpin parents were hoarders. The house was used for storage. It was a trash dump being filled with garbage. The flooring in the bathroom was rotting. Walls were falling apart. A mould enveloped the whole property, plus dead animals were left scattered around inside and outside of the house. David and Louise's behaviour was becoming more sinister. This Polaroid photo taken at the property shows what appears to be a rope tied to the end of a bed, providing an indication of what took place in that home. But after the family moved into the trailer, the time soon arrived when the parents moved out, taking their two youngest with them, leaving the remaining children on their own. Each week, one of the parents would drop off some basic food supplies, but unfortunately it was never enough. Sometimes a food drop was delivered way past its weekly schedule. Their eldest daughter had to ration it out carefully, even though they were all starving. It became normal for the kids to eat mustard, ketchup, or even ice cubes. If any of the children misbehaved, they were effectively locked up in a dog kennel. The pressure Jennifer, the oldest, was under, as she acted as supervisor on behalf of the parents, brought her close to suicide. But she tried her best to remain strong for the sake of her brothers and sisters. However, in 2010, after spending 11 years in that rural location, the family relocated to California, eventually ending up in Perris, in Riverside County. While in California, their 13th child was born. And if the youngsters thought life was going to improve, they were wrong. In fact, the level of abuse increased substantially. In just a few short years, the new home, like the previous one, became uninhabitable. It was a filthy mess, and it was only a matter of time before one of the siblings took some type of action to escape. Which brings us to January 2018.
I live in a family of 15 people, and my parents are abusing. They abuse us, and my two little sisters right now are chained up.
And how many of your siblings are tied up?
Two of my sisters, one of my brothers.
How are they tied up, with rope or with what?
With chains. They're chained up to their bed. The reason I ran away from home was because the chains were making places and they would wake up at night and they would start crying, and they wanted me to call somebody and tell them.
Finally, that call would trigger the end to an horrible nightmare. However, this was just the beginning. When the truth came out regarding the extent of the abuse suffered, their home was dubbed the House of Horrors, and with good reason. Because within 2 hours of that phone call, not only were the remaining children rescued, but their evil parents were arrested. The escape and call were made by 17-year-old Jordan Turpin, seen here, convincing a policeman her story was true, showing him pictures of her tortured siblings. What happened next was terribly shocking. The police paid a visit to the home, knocking on the door. However, David and Louise took a while to answer, and when they finally opened it, they were both breathing heavily, indicating they'd been running around trying to unchain the children. When the police entered the Turpin residence, what they encountered was utterly disturbing. Garbage, feces, a disgusting bathroom, and mouldy food littered the property. The most shocking observation pertained to the children. They were dirty, pale, and extremely skinny. Jordan mentioned in that heartbreaking phone call that 3 of the children were chained to their beds. Authorities found one of the children still chained up. It turned out the kids were often chained up for weeks or months at a time for misbehaving. Misbehaving could mean they stole a piece of food from within their home. One of the rules was they were not allowed to eat, stand up, or speak to each other without parental consent. Punishment for doing that included being thrown down the stairs or having their hair pulled out. Another cruel activity employed by David and Louise was to buy toys, leaving them unopened, while informing their children not to touch them. Often they were beaten by their father with a belt until it drew blood, or violently thrown against walls. Sometimes they were caged up like animals, like when they were chained to beds. On other occasions, food was used to taunt them, although they were not allowed to eat it. However, they were allowed to watch their parents stuff themselves. The police initially believed all the children were under 18, but were shocked to find out 7 of them were actually adults. They were severely malnourished. Their parents had been mistreating 12 of the 13 children for years. They were aged between 2 and 29, and their names all began with the letter J. However, the 2-year-old was the only child who wasn't tortured and appeared to be healthy. The children were only allowed 1 meal a day, plus an annual bath. Jordan, the one who escaped to make that emergency call, looked so emaciated and pale, it was thought she was only around 10, yet she was 17. The 29-year-old Jennifer was described as having the body of an underdeveloped 15-year-old, weighing 82 pounds or just under 6 stone. The siblings were so underfed, their growth became stunted, causing physical and cognitive damage. But the good news was, they were immediately taken to hospital for medical evaluation, treatment for trauma, plus a good meal. How did the parents get away with this abuse for so long? Prosecutors highlighted they used a variety of methods to keep their children isolated, including forcing them to sleep in the day so they'd be awake during the night, in an effort to minimise their chances of being observed by outsiders. The other thing is, the kids were not permitted to date. They didn't have a social life, they weren't allowed to watch TV, they weren't allowed to talk on the phone, or have friends visit, even though they didn't really have any friends. And in the meantime, Louise had slowly pulled away from her sisters and parents with no real contact between them for years, meaning the children lost out in that area. And rather than send them to school, David registered a private school at their address for homeschooling purposes, yet teaching never actually happened, as most of them could barely read or write. Jennifer and Jordan eventually shared with the world how the kids didn't even know what medication was. Their life experiences were based on absolute fear. One of the ways the parents instilled fear was by using the Bible, making the kids believe they had the God-given right to kill them if they failed to be obedient. Eerily, the children were sometimes choked while being asked if they wanted to die and go to hell. The abuse was emotional, physical, mental, and psychological. It was totally corrupted. Even though Louise slowly but deliberately lost contact with her parents and sisters, it didn't stop her frequently sending family photographs to them. The children were always smiling, well-dressed, appearing genuinely happy. They probably felt excited during those times because they were able to eat and wash properly. Photographs were posted on Facebook where they were seen having a great time in various vacation spots. David and Louise were obsessed with Disneyland, even having personalised plates on their cars. They took the family there several times over the years, dressing them in matching outfits. They also renewed their marriage vows in 2011, 13 and 15. Looking at these photos makes it even more shocking to know that the children were being severely neglected behind the scenes, but no one ever knew. The parents used these type of situations to disguise what was really going on. Some specialists have debated whether or not they were paranoid or delusional. Perhaps the parents believed they were protecting their children from the world in some way. Others have debated who the real perpetrator was. Was it the father or the mother? The evidence suggests they did this in corroboration, as both parents were deeply involved in the torture. After being arrested, Louise had the audacity to request a judge to allow her to participate in a mental health diversion program as a result of being diagnosed with histrionic personality disorder, a disorder that's characterized by constant attention seeking, a distorted self-image, being prone to overreacting, and being easily influenced. Now, if that request was approved and she successfully completed the program, it would have meant that all of the charges she faced, well, they would have been dropped. However, the judge denied that request, which I was very happy to hear. It was also alleged the couple abandoned their religious beliefs at some point, when they were fully committed Christians with their unusual and extreme religious views. That could explain why they had so many children, even though they couldn't support them due to financial issues stretching back decades. In fact, they filed for bankruptcy on at least 3 occasions. And it kind of explained why they tried to hide the children from the outside world. Maybe they were paranoid or concerned their children would become corrupted by outsiders. Maybe they even thought their children's suffering served for the greater good and what they were doing as the lesser of 2 evils. Adding to the mystery was David managed to retain a high-paying role as an engineer throughout the children's lives. Whatever caused him to commit these heinous crimes, like if he was delusional or paranoid, surely it would have attracted attention at his workplace. Someone would have noticed something, but that was never the case. At the time of his arrest, though, I believe he was unemployed. Here's a scary thought. If Jordan, the 17-year-old, hadn't escaped, the nightmare would have continued. See, Jordan told the police their mother didn't like the children. Eventually, at least one of those kids could have died as a result of their parents' repulsive behaviour, which included programming the children to help them avoid detection. Well, that was until Jordan took action, leading to their arrest in January 2018. A year later, on the 22nd of February 2019, David and Louise were sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after serving 25 years. It was a maximum punishment under current Californian law due to the severity of the offences, which included a sexual assault from the father toward one of his daughters. In court, both parents cried and tried to apologise to the children after committing what became known as one of the worst cases of child abuse in Californian history. In my humble opinion, it seemed like David and Louise either didn't feel the pain their children were subjected to, or they enjoyed feeling it. And that right there is a definition of a sadist, someone who enjoys causing suffering to others. And that's what I believe they did. I believe they were sadists. I'd be interested to hear your opinion about this case in the comments section. And there are 2 more videos on the screen for you to choose which one to watch next. Well, I'm Royston, and I'll see you next Sunday.